Hey guys, welcome back to Wrestling News 365. Hope everyone is doing very well. As always, there is a ton of news stories to get into today. So let's talk a bit more about WWE. Let's talk a bit more about this Gunther Stark controversy and real discussion and debate that's going on social media about this name change when it comes to Walter. Now, obviously, we spoke about it yesterday that on NXT this past week, NXT 2.0 rather, Walter, after winning his match against Roderick Strong, announced afterwards that the winner of the match was Gunther. And this had stemmed from WWE filing a trademark for Gunther Stark the prior week, and it looks like this is going to be the new name change for Walter going forward. Now, obviously, the name change itself is annoying, but that's WWE. I don't think a lot of people really have too much of a problem with the name change as such, because it's what WWE does. They like to own their own intellectual property. They like to own their own trademarks. That is what it is, I think, at this point. The controversy, of course, stems from, we spoke about this yesterday, Gunther Stark. A simple Google search will show you that Gunther Stark was a name of a submarine commander during the Second World War on the German side of things. Obviously, that's very offensive. There is a ton of baggage and controversy that comes with that, let alone the fact that Walter himself is Austrian. So the connotations there are huge. Now, obviously, a lot of people are debating this. Some of the takes, it must be said, surrounding this, I'm finding baffling, and we'll get into those because there isn't a ton of WWE news stories to talk about today, so we can really get in depth on this one. But a big story when it comes to the trademark itself is that WWE has actually abandoned the filing for Gunther Stark. Now, WWE filed to trademark Gunther Stark on January 13, but abandoned the filing on January 19, which is yesterday. Now, following the news of the filing, many fans pointed out, as I mentioned, that Gunther Stark was a name of a commander in the Second World War for Germany. It was unknown how and who for WWE intended to utilize the trademark at the time of the filing. However, on Tuesday on NXT, Walter referred to himself as Gunther following his victory over Roderick Strong in the main event. Now, Walter, as you can see on the screen right there, his name was officially changed to Gunther on the WWE website. So the name was confirmed yesterday, and again, that's led to a lot of discussion about it. And obviously, it's noted that the last name Stark does not come up on the profile, and I don't think the word Stark's going to come up going forward when it comes to Walter's name change. But as I mentioned, some of the takes involved in this, I just can't wrap my head around. One such take is from WWE producer and road agent, the Hurricane Shane Helms, who believes that NXT superstar Gunther, formerly known as Walter, will, quote, be just fine despite getting a new in-ring name. Now, Helms pointed to his WWE television on the July 5th, 2001 episode of SmackDown, where he would lose his WCW Cruiserweight Championship to Billy Kidman, change his in-ring name from Shane Helms to Hollywood Gregory Helms, and lose his entrance song and finisher. This is what Helms tweeted on Wednesday, quote, in my WWE TV debut, I lost my name, my gimmick, my entrance song, my finisher, and my Cruiserweight Championship all in one night. If I survive that, Walter will be just fine. And I think I saw Ryan Satin point out something of the case of he's just called Gunther, he's not called Gunther Stark, so can people calm down? And when I look at this and I look at what Shane Helms is saying and I look at what Ryan Satin is saying, what other people are saying, I'm like, you are so blind to what is the real issue here. I mean, some people are complaining about the name change, but for me, and I think I have a similar opinion, certainly than the majority of the complaints here, when it comes to this name change issue, is it annoying that Walter's name is changing? Yeah, of course it's annoying, but if you've been a WWE fan or you've watched WWE for long enough, you know that they like to own the names. They like to own their own intellectual property. They like to have their own trademarks. The fact that they diverted from that for 5 years or so was actually a surprise. I don't know if it was refreshing or not, but it was a surprise. And a lot of people went, that's strange, because from a business point of view and a trademark point of view when it comes to WWE, I get it. I absolutely get it. Why would you want to put so much time and money, because TV time is money, why would you want to put so much time and money into building a character's brand and their name should they then leave the company, which so many have over the course of the last 18 months or so because of those budget cuts? Why should they be able to make so much money, or another company rather, be able to make so much money off the name that you helped build up. It's bad business. So I do understand that. I do understand the logic behind it. I don't know if I necessarily agree with it, but I understand the logic behind it when it comes to WWE. So when it comes to the name change of Walter to Gunther, is it annoying? Yes. Is the name as good as Walter? No. But I get it. I do get it. And I don't have a problem with them changing the name. Ultimately, it's annoying, but I don't ultimately have a massive problem with it. The issue, obviously, is the Second World War connotation. If you can't see that, then you really are not looking at the problem here. The biggest problem here is that WWE filed to trademark a name that was the name of a commander in the Second World War for Germany, and then they tried to use that name for an Austrian superstar. That's a problem. That's a massive problem. It's insensitive, it's frankly disgusting, it's offensive, and it's wrong. And someone has to take responsibility for that. Someone has to do their due diligence on that name, because again, frankly, if you just do a Google search, it was all there. It was the top search response if you put that name into Google. So again, my issue is, and I know people are saying that, well, it's not Vince McMahon's fault or whatever. No, it's not Vince McMahon's fault, because Vince McMahon didn't make the name change decision for Gunther in terms of that's going to be his name, Gunther Stark. But whoever did, because even if it was Walter, if it was Walter that said, I want to be Gunther Stark, you would say, why? Like, where have you got that from? It's not a name you just pick out of the air, for me. It's not something you just picked out. What about Gunther Stark? No, nobody does that. So whoever didn't do the due diligence, whoever suggested the idea, there has to be scrutiny on them. There just has to be. And that's the biggest problem here, is they tried to name Walter after someone who was a figure in the Second World War. And just because and even so, the name just Gunther, they'll go, well, they dropped the last name, so it's okay now. It's like, well, it's not, because you still named him after that guy, and you still named him with those connotations. There's too much coincidence involved in all of this. That's the problem. And for those like Shane Helms, for those like Ryan Satin that are basically saying, oh, people need to calm down, they're trying to sort of frame this as, oh, just pro wrestling fans complaining because of another name change. You don't get it, you'll move on. Like when Antonio Cesaro dropped his first name, or when they do it so many times with Matt Riddle, when they dropped his first name, it's like, oh, you're just complaining once again over nothing. And it's like, no, this is separate. You're trying to put this issue into the other issue, frankly. And it's a much bigger issue because it's much more offensive. Ultimately, WWE, it's their prerogative whether they want to drop Matt Riddle into Riddle, or they want to change people's first name into last name, or they do whatever they want. That's their prerogative. But this is offensive. This is offensive to a lot of people, and it's wrong. And just dropping the last name isn't really enough. It's not. And I don't know. And even if they wanted to change it again, and it wasn't to Walter, it was to something else, I would say fine. This isn't a case of pro wrestling fans doing a storm in the teacup. It's different, in my opinion. And some people need to be held accountable, or at least need to explain it. And the people that are trying to play it off as, oh, just pro wrestling fans complaining, not this time. Some people might be complaining about the name change and the fact that he's been Walter for 2 years and he's been on WWE television. I get it, but people's name changes all the time. I understand that part of it. But in my opinion, for me, the reason I'm upset isn't necessarily the fact that they've changed the name. It's what they changed the name to, and they didn't do their due diligence. And I just find it so difficult to believe that they just picked that name out the air and they didn't do a Google search. I just can't buy into that, because nobody's that incompetent. I know WWE have their moments, but there's just no way. Especially if you're filing to trademark it, you do at least do a search of if it was trademarks. You do the Google search, surely. Surely you would. So I just don't know if I buy into it, to be honest with you. And I mean, ultimately, will people move on? I don't know. I really don't know. Because again, even though they've dropped the last name, it's still linked. And people still know what the origins of the name was, and what the original intentions for that name change were. So how anyone could think that was acceptable, I just don't know. I really don't know. Let's talk about the Raw ratings. The Raw ratings, when it comes to the viewership, was down this week, but actually the key demo was up despite a real major NFL game happening on Monday night. That must be said, the NFL game was a bit of a washout, so maybe that actually helped Raw. Nevertheless, Monday's live Martin Luther King Day edition of Monday Night Raw drew an average of 1.613 million viewers on the USA Network. This is according to Nielsen via Showbuzz Daily. Now, this is down 1.2%. It's essentially flat from last week's 1.633 million viewers. For this week's show, the first hour drew 1.7 million, the second hour drew 1.6 million, and the final hour drew 1.45 million. It's actually a severe drop-off from last week's 1.5 million. As I mentioned, it drew a 0.43 rating in the 18 to 49 key demographic, which is actually way up. It's up over 10% from last week's 0.39 key demo rating. Now, Raw ranked number 6 for the night in terms of viewership on cable, which was behind the NFL wildcard game on ESPN between the Cardinals and the Rams. Raw ranked 7th of the night in terms of the cable top 150 with that key 18 to 49 demographic rating. But as I mentioned, it was actually up from last week. Monday Night Raw's viewership, though, was down 13% from the same week in 2021, while the key demo rating was down 28% from the same week in 2021 as well. So again, it's curious because of this idea that the return of fans being back on the road would fix WWE. I think the shine of that's worn off, to be honest with you. And I don't mean to turn this into, it's a WWE news video and you're talking about AEW, but we're still seeing the pattern that is just the pattern, and maybe it's a television pattern as well, but we're still seeing the pattern of year on year WWE is down about 10%. The jump was bigger, certainly because of the pandemic, and it sped things up, but that decrease every single year is still exactly the same, and I think it's going to continue the same. Now with AEW, on the flip side of things, year on year they're up. Whether or not they can continue and they find their ceiling, I don't know. Raw, and to be honest, I thought Raw was fine on Monday. For what it was worth, I think Raw, as a 3-hour show, it's always going to have its highs and lows. It's never going to be a perfect show whilst it's 3 hours because it's just too hard. It's just too hard to be that consistent for 3 hours. You have to take it segment by segment, and the majority of the segments were fine, and the in-ring action was fine. There's a bit of buzz going into the Rumble because the Rumble was a good card, and you've got this bit of SmackDown crossover with Rollins being on both shows, which kind of connects both. So I think Raw was a fine show. It's like watching it any week. It's always a slog. It's always a slog to watch, and I think it always will be. Finally, we have the first guest announced for the 2022 Broken Skull Sessions with Stone Cold Steve Austin. The first Broken Skull Sessions episode of 2022 will air the day before the Royal Rumble Premium Live events, no longer pay-per-views, they're Premium Live events. WWE announced yesterday that WWE Hall of Famer Stone Cold Steve Austin will interview Raw Women's Champion Becky Lynch on the Broken Skull Sessions this month. The episode will premiere on Peacock and the WWE Network on Friday, January 28th, of course, the day before the Rumble on the Saturday. While Lynch previously appeared on an episode of Straight Up Steve Austin on the USA Network, this is actually her first Broken Skull Sessions appearance, and of course there's been plenty that's happened between her appearance on Straight Up Steve Austin and the Broken Skull Sessions, obviously one being motherhood, so I'm sure they'll get into all of that. Austin's last 5 guests of 2021 were Hall of Famer Kevin Nash, Bobby Lashley, Seth Rollins, Jeff Hardy, right before his release, and Hall of Famer Diamond Dallas Page. So they're always a fun watch. I always do enjoy watching the Broken Skull Sessions. I think Steve Austin, and he has been doing it for a while. Of course, he was one of the original pro wrestling podcasters after Colt Cabana. But he's been doing pro wrestling podcasting now for what? Near enough a decade. I think. I mean, when did this podcast start? I want to say 2014, but I think it might have even been before then. It might be 2013. I don't want to say 2012. I think that's too early, but 2013, 2014. So we're talking now about nearly a decade. And in fairness to him, in that spell of the last decade, he's become a great interviewer. I mean, the programs are great. I think that, I did enjoy the live podcast that he did on the network. I don't think WWE did, because they often got into trouble with some of the things he said, and whether it's Paige talking, or the Big Show drinking, or Dean Ambrose, his interview, or Triple H with her comments about China, or Vince McMahon's comments about Cesaro. It felt like just with every every episode he did of the Stone Cold podcast, it was just controversy or people getting in trouble or WWE not being happy. And I think this suits all parties, isn't it? It's that they can do long form content. WWE can have a look and take stuff out if they don't like it, but it's still relatively raw. The only thing is frustrating to me is that at one point they had two versions of the Broken Skull sessions on the network, where one was completely uncensored, so any curse words, swear words weren't bleeped or blurred out, if you will. And I feel like they've taken those away. You can only see one version of the interview, which sucks for me because sometimes you can be an adult, you can prefer the other version, but I guess moving on to Peacock, they've moved away from that. Nevertheless, I'm excited for Becky Lynch's interview. But look, guys, as always, it's just one man's opinion. What are your thoughts on these WWE news stories today? Let me know your thoughts in the comment section below. I'll do my best to respond and reply to all of your comments. Really enjoy interacting with you guys. Be sure to smash a like on the like button and be sure to subscribe. Bottom right hand corner, AEW and Impact news coming today as well. I'll speak to you again very, very soon. Peace.
Hey guys, thank you for watching, listening, streaming, or however you come across this video today. Be sure to click on the video on the right there to watch our next video, or click the bottom there to subscribe, or the bottom right hand corner. Thank you very much, and I'll speak to you again very soon.